All right, to discuss this further, we're now being joined by Daniel Rubenstein, who's joining me from Tel Aviv. He's the current Israeli citizen spokesperson and former advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu and former advisor to former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Mr. Rubenstein, thank you so much for joining me on the broadcast. Sir, do you think the fall of the Assad regime will help in advancing talks for a hostage deal between Israel and Hamas, as is being suggested?
I'm not sure there's a direct connection between the fall of Assad and the willingness of Hamas factions in Gaza to reach a deal. I think there are a number of factors that have led us to this point where perhaps Hamas may be a little bit more open in the past than it was to settle for a deal. The first is the incoming president of the United States has said that there will be hell to pay if Hamas does not release the hostages, including the American citizens among them. The other thing is that the people of Gaza are tired, perhaps, of Hamas's war, which has brought them nothing but ruin and misery. It's only when this war will end that the people of Gaza can begin to rebuild. At the same time, the Israeli prime minister has offered a cash reward to anyone who is holding a hostage and releases the hostage, in addition to safe passage outside of Gaza. So these factors combined may lead to a new willingness of what remains of Hamas to release the hostages. We have to remember that many of Hamas's leaders, including the architects of the October 7th massacre, have been eliminated. So all of these factors may lead to a new opening for a hostage release deal.
Daniel, you know, when Qatar says that momentum could soon be gained in terms of a ceasefire, in terms of a truce for the exchange of the hostages, as of now, if you just look at the current situation, Israel is advancing along the buffer zone with Syria, and it happened hours after Assad's regime fell. And this is after the collapse of the 1974 pact, which Netanyahu declared. In spite of the ceasefire, now I'm talking about the Hezbollah front with Lebanon, in spite of the ceasefire, we've seen strikes continue. And the entire region really remains volatile, more now than it has been in the past. In the background of all of this, what are the chances of a hostage deal really coming through? And with the kind of inputs that you've already shared with me in your earlier response, if you add to that all that I've just mentioned, what are the chances?
Yes, you're correct that so many things are happening in the Middle East at once. It feels like a new decade every single day. What happened with the fall of the Assad regime in Syria is that the regime in Iran has lost a key player in its axis, in its ring of fire that surrounds Israel. Iran wants to supply Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, but Iran does not border southern Lebanon. It relies on a ground route through Iraq and into Syria with the support of the Assad regime so that Iran can continue to supply rockets, missiles, and drones to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now a piece of this puzzle for Iran has fallen, and there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. On the one hand, Israel is pleased to see the Iranian axis weakening, but a big question from Israel is, who's the government of Syria now? I'm reading about HTS. This is a group that you will see is a Al-Qaeda offshoot. Well, at what point did it branch off from Al-Qaeda? I believe it was around 2017. So this is a group that would sympathize with the 9/11 attacks on New York and Washington and only split apart for other more local political reasons. So Israel has enormous reason to worry about who may be the government of Syria, and will Syria keep its commitments that the Assad regime made from the early 70s, that there would be some separation of forces between Israel and Syria. So there's a lot of uncertainties, and chief among them is the hostage release agreement.
Yes.
There are so many factors at play at once that it's hard to predict what will happen on one front, which will lead to something on the other.
Daniel, I'll pick one or two things out of your, your response. You mentioned 2017 and you mentioned HTS. There is actually a post which is still out there on X from the U.S. Embassy in Syria, where this is back from 2017, where there is a reward of $10 million for anybody who can provide any information on Al-Golani. And this is from the U.S. government. Now, that post is very much out there. And as of now, just hours earlier, I would say, the U.S. has now said that this is a historical opportunity. And it's a big opportunity for Syria to come about. It's if you juxtapose the two things together, it's really difficult to understand how these both things have happened in a span of 7 years. As of now, it is still uncertain what happens in Syria. What will this government look like? Is it going to be government? How are they going to rule Syria? Too many questions. But as far as the Israel-Syria borderline is concerned, will we see borderlines and buffer zones between Israel and Syria being reworked with HTS taking control of Damascus?
I hope not, but what Israel wants most with Syria is peace. We want a peace agreement with Syria. We want to live in peace as good neighbors. Now, it's up to the people of Syria and the new government of Syria to decide what its policy will be. The people of Israel are still waiting to hear from this new government of Syria that it will keep its previous agreements with the government of Israel. But there have been cause for concern, which was that a couple days ago, armed groups in Syria launched an attack on UN peacekeepers who were in this buffer zone between Israel and Syria. And Israel responded by defending the UN peacekeepers and moving into the territory where the UN peacekeepers are in order to keep these armed groups a bit farther away from the people of Israel until we find out what's going on. But I hope we can find out what's going on, that the government of Syria will say that it wants to live in peace with Israel, and we can go on with our lives and build a better future for everyone in the region.
Any talks of peace is definitely something to look forward to at this point more than ever before. Daniel Rubenstein, thank you so much for joining me from Tel Aviv, sharing all your insights.
Thank you for having me.